the food on our plates. And the shops and the labels don't always tell you the whole story.
I think they encourage you to buy more than you need, and that causes a lot of waste.
Whether you're staying in or going out, you've told us you can feel ripped off by the promises made about what you eat and what you pay for it.
How do you know that is half price? Right? So what they've done, they've bumped the price up and then knocked it down.
From claims that don't stack up to the secrets behind the packaging, we'll uncover the truth about Britain's food so you can be sure that you are getting what you expect at the right price. Your food, your money. This is Rip Off Britain.
Hello and welcome to a special series of Rip Off Britain, investigating the truth about something that's a huge part of every household spending, and that's food. But when it comes to what we eat, it's not just what we pay for it that we mind about. Just as important is what's in it and where it's come from. But when you think about it, the journey of our raw ingredients before they ever arrive on our plates can be much more complicated than you'd ever imagine, whether that's because they've come from thousands of miles away or literally just up the road. But you may not always get all the information you need to know from whoever's selling them, or indeed from what it says on the label or the packet. But you know, however far our food has travelled, any gaps in the detail of where it's actually come from can lead to serious problems. So at the root of all of the stories that we're going to be investigating today is how much we know about where our food started out and what that means for its price and even for its safety. And we'll also be discovering why it is that near identical words on the packaging can mean very different things when it comes to what's actually inside. Coming up, how an illegal trade in food foraged from the forest could mean it's poisonous mushrooms that end up on your plate.
We probably take around 200 calls each year from some doctors, nurses, paramedics about suspected poisoning with fungi.
With so many sheep in British fields, why do we still buy in thousands of tons of lamb from New Zealand?
From June till January, there really is no need then at that time. We have a plentiful supply and it's a good, healthy, wholesome product at the best possible price.
And the dairy farmer going back to the past as he battles to save his business. But is what he's selling safe?
Come and try some unpasteurised milk. More milk straight from the farm.
You only have to turn on the latest TV cookery show these days to find a celebrity chef who's talking about how important it is that the food that we eat is seasonal, fresh, and that we know where it comes from. And if it comes from nearby, then all the better. But it does seem that there is one particular food where the demand for it to be fresh, seasonal and locally sourced could cause more harm than good, and that's mushrooms. Now, the best mushrooms are considered a real delicacy and may well be priced accordingly. But there are fears that not every mushroom that finds its way from the forest onto the market or indeed a restaurant menu has been picked by someone who really knows what they're doing. And if they've mistaken a delicious mushroom for a deadly one, then the repercussions could be lethal. Sarah Cadbury is on the hunt for a tasty treat.
Oh, there's some puffballs. And they're busy releasing their spores. Look at that. Wow, look at that. That's impressive.
She's looking to see which of the mushrooms that she finds could make a tasty treat. And the ancient woodland of the New Forest in Hampshire is the perfect spot to find them.
Very common, grows on most kinds of wood. Pretty thing.
And there's never been a better time to forage, with many well-known chefs extolling the culinary benefits of picking your own tasty fungi. But it's not just the taste that makes these specimens so precious. With more and more restaurants serving up the delicacy, these forest fungi have also become very valuable.
The mushrooms are definitely sold on to the London restaurants, where they are advertised as freshly picked New Forest mushrooms, and then can command really a very good price.
Wild, locally picked mushrooms can sell for anywhere between £20 and £50 a kilo. But Sarah, who's a member of a local group that monitors the forest mushrooms, is worried that during the peak foraging season from September to November, the forest is attracting not just those who want to sample the fungi for themselves, but also those who want to cash in.
People have come in minibuses and they walk line abreast through the woods, and then that minibus will pick them up sort of a mile away at the other side of the wood, and they will have picked pounds and pounds and pounds of fungi, which is a very valuable haul.
But it's not just the damage to the forest that this mass-scale foraging is causing. If the people picking them, and maybe going on to sell them to markets or restaurants, have mistaken a poisonous mushroom for an edible one, the consequences can be disastrous.
Well, I just noticed this. It's definitely not an edible mushroom, or that probably wouldn't poison you, but would give you a stomach upset. But this is the sort of thing that could be collected by commercial pickers.
And the authorities around forests where these fungi flourish are worried about where they could end up next. They fear poisonous mushrooms could end up being sold on to restaurants or find their way into our own kitchens. So they're determined to stop that happening. You know, there's nothing quite like the smell of a newly picked fungi or mushroom. It really is quite exceptional. And providing in the New Forest I wasn't to pick more than 1.5 kilos, I'd be well within the law. But here in Epping Forest, which is right on the edge of the City of London, it is absolutely illegal and has been for centuries. But more recently, foraging for fungi, for mushroom, has become such a huge problem that they now have forest keepers who patrol the whole forest and uphold the bylaws. And if you took anything out of the forest, you'd be prosecuted. Last year, Epping Forest prosecuted 20 people for illegal mushroom foraging. Nick Baker, the senior forest keeper, patrols the area.
So how big has the problem become?
It's been a really big problem. Last year we had issues with car parks that normally only have 4 or 5 cars, had 40 cars in, and it was as obvious as that. And people were going out and just disappearing in large groups, just picking whatever they found, some edible, some inedible. On one Saturday alone I confiscated 50 kilos. So that was just a very small percentage of what we were losing.
Morning patrols like this one are a way of clamping down and protecting the 1,600 species of fungi that grow in the forest.
Well, we have increased patrolling in areas where we know they're going to be. We will take them to court and we'll prosecute them under the Epping Forest Act. And it's not an insignificant amount. It's £200 maximum fine. And with add to that cost, you're looking at £300-400.
With names like the Destroying Angel, Panther Cap, Death Cap, it doesn't take me to tell you that there are some mushrooms and fungi in British woodland that really are best avoided. But when you've got individuals who are foraging and sweeping up everything in sight because all they're interested is in the money they can make from mushrooms, how can we be sure that they have the knowledge to be able to distinguish between the delicious and the downright dangerous? Ecologist Dr. Jeremy Dagley also works in Epping Forest and sees the hazards that illegal foraging can pose. So how experienced do you need to be able to differentiate between the safe and the killers?
You really do need to know your stuff. You need to know the varieties and variations. And if you're putting them in a bag together and they're breaking up, you can't be sure which bits you've got.
And to the untrained foraging eye, searching for the right mushrooms to eat can be tricky. So what have you found there, Jeremy?
You get these fungi that help sustain the beech tree, they actually feed it. But they're species that include edible ones and non-edible ones, even toxic ones. The one you're holding there, it will make you very ill.
You see they're breaking up. So again, in a large polythene bag, you'll have all of these bits mixed in together. You're never going to be able to distinguish, are you? Unless you're a real expert. And if you get sick, unless you know the species of mushroom you've eaten, it can be hard to know how to treat the poisoning. Dr. John Thompson is the director of the National Poisons Information Service in Cardiff.
We probably take around 200 calls each year from sort of doctors, nurses, paramedics about suspected poisoning with fungi, and about 10 times that, about a couple of thousand inquiries on our online database each year from people who think they may have been poisoned.
The service's busiest time coincides with the peak of the mushroom foraging season.
If you eat a mushroom that's poisonous, there's several different types of poisoning can happen. The most common thing is gastrointestinal disturbance. You'll feel nauseated, you might vomit, you might have some tummy trouble. And for most mushrooms, that's all that's going to happen. Unfortunately, for some of the more toxic mushrooms, you can then go on to develop either liver failure or kidney failure.
So, if you're tempted by foraged mushrooms, the best advice is simple.
Make sure you know what you're doing. If you don't know what it is, don't eat it. And if you're buying mushrooms, you need to buy them from a reliable, reputable source.
Now, where would we be without milk? Here in the UK, we buy over 5 billion litres of the stuff every year. And in case you're interested, that's enough to fill 4,500 swimming pools. But with supermarkets waging price wars over the cost of a pinter, dairy farmers are left increasingly upset by the dwindling amount the stores are paying them for their milk. So it's perhaps no wonder that some of those farmers are turning to new ways to make extra income from their herds. But one solution that's been growing in popularity, especially at farmers' markets, has caused a bit of a stir, even though it's the most traditional type of milk you could possibly get. It's one of the most hard-fought battlegrounds in the countryside, and it's made headlines again this year. On one side of the dairy wars, the supermarkets determined to sell the white stuff as cheaply as possible. On the other, the farmers who say they've been backed into a corner and forced to sell their milk at a loss. It's been a long-running battle that's forced some dairy farmers to give up, sell their herds and close their farms for good. A difficult decision that Sussex farmer Stephen Hook has faced in the past.
We were struggling. We were being paid effectively by the supermarkets below the cost of production or at the cost of production. And you can bear that for a short time, but for it to be going on for years and years.
But rather than shut up shop, in 2007, Stephen took the decision to transform his business by finding a brand new market for a very old-fashioned kind of milk, one that brings in 8 times as much money as the milk he used to sell.
Come and try some unpasteurised milk. Raw milk straight from the farm, half-pint glass, only £1.
Yes, Stephen's selling the most back-to-basics dairy product there is, raw milk.
Milked yesterday afternoon.
Most milk is pasteurised before it's put on sale, but raw milk has a much quicker journey from cow to container.
Go on, get up, go on.
In fact, it goes through 3 filters before it's chilled and sold to the public. Fans of raw milk say it's fresher, tastier and healthier than the regular pasteurised kind.
So it's a very, very fast chilling and filtering process immediately after the cow's milk to really capture that freshness.
But raw milk has its critics too. When milk is pasteurised, any nasties inside are wiped out. But raw milk never goes through that process, so some people say there's a real risk of harmful pathogens and bacteria still being present. To protect against that, Stephen and other raw milk farmers like him work hard to make sure the milking parlour is kept as clean as any other food preparation area.
We do our absolute best to produce clean milk week in, week out. And we've never had a case of food poisoning in the 7 years that we've been selling raw milk. But I cannot say that there is not a risk with raw milk. Similarly, I cannot say there's no risk with any food.
Of course, it might be easier if the cows respected the clean standards that Stephen likes to keep in the milking parlour.
We are dealing with live animals, they will come into the milking parlour and sometimes do what animals do. So whatever's going on in the milking parlour, the key moment is ensuring that the teat is clean and that it's a clean unit. You should produce clean milk.
And Stephen regularly sends samples of milk, butter and cream to be tested to make sure it's fit for human consumption.
We test our milk every week so we know what our pathogen levels are. And if we've got good results, we don't sit back and think, we've cracked it. We've just got to keep on top of it the whole time. Never be complacent.
But however high the standards, raw milk is still a controversial product, even at a local farmer's market.
But I wouldn't want to drink raw milk because of the bacteria in there, because it hasn't been pasteurised.
It's completely natural, it's straight from the cow, straight into a cup, then what's the problem?
Very happy to try it, eat cheese the whole time, and frankly you pick up more on the underground than you would drinking raw milk.
And it's attitudes like that which in 2011 led to Stephen installing a raw milk vending machine in Selfridge's flagship London store.
People loved it. Every time somebody put coins into the machine, opened the cupboard door, held their bottle up to the nozzle and pressed the button and saw milk going into their bottle, they smiled. Every time.
The machine was a big hit, but 2 years later Stephen reluctantly agreed to remove it after the Food Standards Agency argued that the sale of raw drinking milk from retail outlets was a breach of food hygiene laws. But those rules haven't stopped raw milk becoming ever more popular, thanks in part to endorsements from celebrity chefs and food writers, all of which, of course, only stoked the fires of controversy even more, with recent reports linking raw milk with cases of E. coli poisoning in children. It's incidents like these which led the Food Standards Agency to re-evaluate the rules around the sale of raw milk in England, Wales and Northern Ireland, and some are calling for an outright ban, as there has been in Scotland for more than 30 years.
The incidence and frequency of outbreaks related to raw drinking milk, that's becoming increasingly rare over the past couple of decades. But that's not to say that there is no risk. And actually, in autumn of 2014, there were 3 separate incidents involving a handful of cases of E. coli 0157 that were potentially linked to consumption of raw drinking milk. So the risks are still there. What the current controls are designed to do is to balance management of the public health risks and maintaining consumer choice. And that's what we're doing at the moment.
Despite the risks, Stephen thinks a total ban would be an overreaction.
If raw milk was banned, I would still sell raw milk. Now that might sound a bit shocking because I'm going to be breaking the law. All other food has got risk, and the FSA seem to accept the risk with other food, but they seem to not have any tolerance of risk with raw milk.
So, for now at least, Stephen is determined to keep selling raw milk to whoever wants to buy it.
Still to come on Rip Off Britain. Are we being told porkies when it comes to how the pigs whose meat we eat were reared? Or is the truth simply that what it says on the label doesn't mean what you think?
They sell a product that the public come along and buy because they feel that, it's outdoor bred. It must be living outdoors, it's having a happy life, when that is not actually the case.
And they look harmless enough, but what secrets could these innocent-looking foods be hiding? Now, you might expect that the food that's been shipped or flown halfway across the globe is going to cost an awful lot more than the equivalent from your own doorstep. But that's not always the case, particularly when it comes to one of Britain's favourite foods, lamb. Now, for some reason, meat that may not have travelled all of that far, say from a farm somewhere here in Britain, is going to often cost a good bit more than the stuff that comes from a lot further afield. So, I've been trying to find out why. Every year, more than 16 million lambs are born in the UK. But despite that plentiful supply, annually, we still import more than 60,000 1,000 tonnes of lamb, all the way from New Zealand. Now, when you're out shopping, you may not bother to spend too much time examining the labels on the food that you're buying, but British lamb like this, which just came from a few miles down the road from where I am here in Wales, has to compete for supermarket shelf space with New Zealand lamb like this, which has travelled 11,000 miles from the other side of the world. Even at the peak of the British lamb season, when UK farms produce more lamb than at any other time of the year, we still import the stuff halfway around the planet. And though prices do vary, the New Zealand lamb will usually cost around the same, or sometimes even less than the lamb that's been born and bred in Britain. I wanted to find out how that could possibly be the case, so I've come to John Davies' farm in the Brecon Beacons. It's home to a 1,000-strong flock of prime Welsh sheep, and when I went to visit in October, it was one of the busiest periods of the year.
That is some view, John. I have to say, look at all those sheep. The hills are alive with the sound of bleating. We are surrounded by so many sheep. Why are we importing so much New Zealand lamb?
Well, I don't know. It's a little frustrating, especially during the times of peak production from June till January. You know, there really is no need then at that time. We have a plentiful supply, and it's a good, healthy, wholesome product at the best possible price.
So are you saying that in season, when British lamb is plentiful, that the price is comparable with that of the imported New Zealand lamb?
Well, we are actually cheaper at the present time, and the wholesalers can't buy New Zealand lamb cheaper than what they can buy British at the present time.
But John, like lots of other farmers, is worried that the cheaper British lamb prices in peak season may not always be passed on to the consumer.
It's disappointing to us when on farm lamb is 40 pence a kilo cheaper, and to the consumer it's actually 27 pence a kilo more expensive. We want to see the price coming down then in the store.
So we compared the price of lamb from Britain and New Zealand at two of the major supermarkets that stocked them both at the peak of the season. And at the time that we checked, in November, the costs didn't quite reflect the abundance of cheap British lamb that you might expect. At Asda, British and New Zealand legs of lamb were the same price all month, £7 a kilo, even though the New Zealand ones had flown halfway around the world. But at Tesco, an offer on lamb leg steaks from New Zealand meant that buying 2 packs of the imported lamb worked out at £1.66 per kilo, cheaper than buying the homegrown stuff. And even without that offer, the store's British and New Zealand lamb steaks would have cost exactly the same for the first 3 weeks of the month, despite the distance that the foreign ones had travelled. Pricing like this has landed supermarkets in hot water in the past, with Welsh farmers protesting that the pricing of their lamb is unfair, and they've complained to the stores that ran promotional offers on New Zealand lamb at the height of the British lamb season. So how can it be that lamb flown from so far away can compete on price with the meat from so much closer to home? Well, put simply, it's because New Zealand has so many sheep.
John's 1,000-strong flock may sound like an awful lot of sheep, and actually it is, compared with most UK farms. But when it comes to numbers, then New Zealand sheep farmers really do have the edge on their British counterparts.
There's a staggering 29 million sheep in New Zealand, and to find out more, we set up an online chat with the head of their farmers' union.
Rick, can you explain to me the economics of this and how it is that New Zealand sheep farmers are able to send lamb 11,000 miles to British supermarkets and still make it pay?
It's a combination of a number of things. One of the things is very good genetics, and there's been a lot of work done in New Zealand on sheep genetics. The other big factor is our climate. We can graze our sheep outdoors all year round, and so it's very low cost and very, very good grass, clover pastures, and low labour inputs is probably the key.
UK shoppers were first introduced to New Zealand lamb in the 1950s, And there then followed a decades-long marketing campaign to convince us that their lamb was better than ours.
New Zealand lamb shoulder meat is always delicious.
And to the despair of British sheep farmers, that's a message that some consumers have swallowed. But it's not all bad news for UK farmers. In recent years, the amount of New Zealand lamb we've imported has declined by almost a fifth, thanks in part to supermarkets like Sainsbury's, Aldi and Lidl pledging to stock only British lamb at the peak of the season. And for a number of years, Morrison's has gone one step further, getting the majority of its lamb from British farmers all year round.
Because we work directly with the farmers, they know us, they're used to working with us, they put aside some of their stock so we can buy lamb later, and either late lamb or we buy hoggers, which is a year-old lamb. It's good for us, we get British lamb all year round. It's good for them, they get a more stable income across the year.
How can you make it economically viable now?
Morrison's a bit different from other supermarkets because we're a food manufacturer as well. People think you can only use certain cuts of lamb, you can only use a lamb leg, and that's the only bit people go for. That's not true at all. There's a huge range of it, but I think that people sometimes don't recognise that. We try and obviously use the full carcass because it's good obviously for sustainability, and there's some really great different things you can do with different parts of lamb.
We asked Tesco and Asda whether they have any plans to follow other supermarkets in stocking just British lamb at the peak of the season. Tesco told us it sells more British lamb than any other retailer, and when it's in season, most of the lamb on their shelves is British. And when we asked Asda how British and New Zealand lamb could be priced identically at the height of the British season, it said that where its meat comes from has no influence on price. They simply charge the same price for the same product across all stores. Asda went on to say that it does stock lamb from Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland all the year round, but that the store simply has to import some lamb from New Zealand because British consumers eat more lamb legs than chops or joints, and there isn't the quantity of lambs in the UK to sustain this. So it seems that one key to making British lamb cheaper could be for us to eat a wider variety of cuts. And that's a passion for this Michelin star-winning chef. Stephen Terry insists on using local Welsh lamb in his Abergavenny restaurant, and not just the popular cuts of meat, but the ones that British farmers often struggle to sell at home and have to export overseas.
Less popular ones than the ones that tend to be exported are the neck, in France very popular.
Lots of meat on it.
Yeah, it's good, and comes further down than you can see as well. And this part here, what would be called a belly on a pork, but on a lamb it refers to as a breast. It's not utilised as much as it should be, and it can save you money.
Yeah, so give me some few ideas then on how we can get better value out of all of these cuts, maybe the more popular and familiar ones as well as the less familiar ones.
Well, for me it's about slow cooking, because people associate, a leg or a shoulder of lamb really with a Sunday roast.
Yeah.
Whereas you can slow cook a shoulder or a leg throughout the day for your evening meal, any day of the week for a midweek meal.
Well, there's only one way to find out if Stephen's right. I have to put my hand up and admit, I love to cook and I love to eat. I have never before eaten or cooked lamb breast, but that is absolutely delicious. That's definitely going to be on the menu from now on. So it took just one meal to convert me to those cheaper cuts of lamb. Admittedly, I did have Michelin-starred help, but even without Stephen there, this is definitely something I'll be trying at home. And while that alone may not be the answer that British sheep farmers are after, it is definitely moving one step closer to the day when it's perhaps British lamb that will be filling the supermarket shelves.
Now, as an island with a pretty wet and not so warm climate, we need to buy in a lot of what we like to eat from overseas. But while we import from all over the planet, some of the food coming through our ports and airports might not have been treated with the same strict safety standards as it would have if it had been produced here in the UK. So it could pose a serious risk
if it were to go on sale? Whether it's rice from India, nuts from Brazil, or tuna from the Seychelles, almost a fifth of the food we eat in the UK every year is brought in from outside Europe. And that means it may not always have been grown, farmed, or made in the same way as if it had come from the UK. Even so, everything that's actually sold here, wherever it's come from, has to meet the same standards for hygiene, cleanliness, additives and chemicals as anything that is grown or made here. John Griffin and his team at Kent Scientific are one of 10 UK local authority labs charged with inspecting the food and drink we import from abroad and intercepting anything that might be dangerous before it ends up in our trolleys. So John, you're bringing me a few goodies, are you?
Yes, I'm bringing you a trolley of a selection of foods which have been listed with some potential issues in terms of the safety.
So you want to poison me, really?
I'm going to test you really more than anything else and see whether you would know what the problems are.
Now, the EU has some of the most stringent food restrictions in the world. And while, of course, most of the food we import from outside Europe succeeds in meeting them, some of it doesn't. Often because it contains banned additives, or the additives are at dangerously high levels. It's fruit and veg that we buy in more than anything else, £9 billion worth in 2013. But on a recent shipment of apricots like these from Turkey, John's team found dangerous levels of an artificial additive.
The problem with the apricots, and whether you know this or not, they do have a preservative, especially when they're this colour.
You mean a natural preservative?
It's not a natural preservative, it's an artificial additive,
okay.
And that's called sulfur dioxide. And sulfur dioxide is also an allergen. So at too high levels, it can cause problems, especially for people who've got breathing problems, such as asthma.
So how high were the levels?
Well, the levels were certainly in excess of 2,000 parts per million, which is a lot in terms of an additive level.
The apricots had far more sulfur dioxide than the EU allows, so if they had made it on sale, they could have had serious implications for anybody with breathing difficulties. Laboratories like this do random spot checks on shipments of food coming into ports right across the country. And if just one of those tests finds something that breaks the rules, then everything from that supplier might have to be checked until they can prove that they've cleaned up their act. The test can also show if food has somehow been contaminated thanks to poor hygiene, as was the case with the recent shipment of sesame seeds like these.
These have come from India, and the issues with sesame seeds have been more to do with hygiene, so they're finding bacteria, especially salmonella.
Because of bad handling?
Bad handling, obviously the source of salmonella is animals, so yes, it's probably down to poor hygiene. These are monkey nuts, nuts in shells from Brazil, and these have been found to have high levels of aflatoxin in them. If they're stored poorly in a high climate, high humidity, molds can grow, and if the molds grow mature, then the toxins will fall.
Now, if the sesame seeds or monkey nuts had not been seized and stopped from going on sale, the food poisoning they could have caused wouldn't have been detected until someone fell ill after eating them. So would all these foods that you've talked about so far, would they therefore be taken off the shelves?
They would be stopped at source. If they've come in through imports, they would be stopped and rejected and either destroyed or exported back. Once they find a problem, then there will be a routine stop on that product until that problem goes away.
And it's not just shipments from one bad supplier that might be affected. In some cases, all products originating from a particular area may have extra inspections to be sure that there isn't a wider problem. Now, at the moment, there are around 40 products on an EU-wide list of imports that are given these additional checks because of problems in the past. These include half of all melons coming to the UK from Nigeria and half of all basmati rice from Pakistan. John's confident that everything possible is being done to stop toxic imports from hitting the shelves.
The final warning is they have been identified as having problems. They are not on the shelves at the moment. They did not get past imports, but the important thing is just to stay vigilant, and we will keep reading them out as they come through.
Well, John, we won't be nibbling on these, will we?
No, definitely not on those ones.
With so many products competing for space on the supermarket shelf, the labels on food have to work really hard to grab our attention and convince us to buy one product rather than another. When buying meat, many of us want the reassurance that the animals have been treated well, so we might look for a label that puts across that message. But when we looked behind some of the labels that might lead you to think that an animal has had a healthy and happy outdoor upbringing, we discovered the truth was not always what the marketing might lead you to believe. Sausages, bacon, yum! The traditional British fry-up is the favourite breakfast of many of us. But how often do we stop to think about where that meat comes from? Research shows that half of us say we're worried about animal welfare, and sales of so-called ethical food and drink have more than tripled in the past 15 years. But when it comes to pork, it isn't always easy to understand how exactly the pigs the meat comes from are reared. Packets can come with a bewildering array of descriptions like free-range, outdoor reared and outdoor bred, all designed to showcase the meat's welfare credentials. But would you know what those terms actually mean? We set up a stall in Bury Market to see how many passing shoppers could tell us the difference between them.
Outdoor reared, I'm not too sure about that. Outdoor reared.
Similar to outdoor.
It is, isn't it? Yeah.
Confusing,
I think outdoor reared means the pig spends most of his life outside.
Well, it all seems like the same thing. Free range, outdoor bred, all outdoors.
You too might assume that the use of the word outdoor means that the pigs spent most of their time outside, but in fact it's not that simple. Ian O'Reilly's family has farmed these Lancashire hills for 500 years. His pigs are organic, which means they spend at least 80% of their lives outside. But that's not typically the case with the pigs that are called outdoor bred or outdoor reared, which is why Ian thinks the terms are confusing, because pigs described that way probably won't have spent as much of their lives outdoors as you might assume.
Outdoor bred means that the pigs are born outdoors, so the sow gives birth outdoors, and when they're weaned they come back inside, so that can take place at about sort of 4 weeks of age.
That means outdoor bred pigs can spend up to 80% of their lives inside. Pigs described as outdoor reared do get some more time outside, but again, not as much as you might expect.
Outdoor reared actually means they've got to spend half of their life outdoors, but half of its life has been spent inside.
It was concern on this point that in 2010 led to adverts by Waitrose for their outdoor bred pork being banned, because it was claimed people might assume that the pigs spent their entire life outdoors. Now, in fact, Waitrose is a store that has unusually high welfare standards when it comes to pigs. It told us that all its pork, bacon and ham, even its cheapest products, come from British outdoor bred or outdoor reared pigs, and customers can be confident it's all the same higher welfare pork. It added that its pork is sourced only from its own farmers, all of whom are RSPCA Freedom Food accredited, and that while the pigs that move inside live in bright, airy, straw-bedded barns, the sows remain living outside for their entire life. But as far as Ian's concerned, right across the industry, the terms outdoor bred and outdoor reared are being used in a way that's confusing for customers.
What the terms do very well is they sell a product that the public come along and buy because they feel that, it's outdoor bred. It must be living outdoors, it's having a happy life, it's foraging, it's roostling around and digging up acorns and all sorts. When that is not actually the case, the terms are quite misleading, really.
In fact, only around 2% of Britain's pigs are truly free-range, spending the majority of their lives outside. Much of that free-range meat is sold directly by the farmers or through butchers and restaurants, although there are big-name stores that sell it, particularly Waitrose. But on a typical supermarket shop elsewhere, you're more likely to be choosing between pork that's labelled as outdoor reared, outdoor bred, or indeed that doesn't give any clue at all as to what amount of time the pig might have spent outdoors. A recent survey found that 83% of people asked would like to see the method of farming clearly marked on the front of their meat. And after being flummoxed by what the labels we showed them actually meant, some of those shoppers we met in Bury might agree.
When we say outdoors, you expect them to be outdoors, but not in like sheds and all that.
Basically, it's misleading. They breed them outside, then bring them in.
It should be explained a lot better.
Well, in 2010, most of the big supermarkets signed up to a code of practice supposed to do just that. In particular, the big stores agreed to explain on their packaging more detail of how outdoor bred or reared pigs are farmed, so that customers wouldn't assume they'd spent more time outdoors than they had. And they agreed that, where possible, this information would be in the same field of vision on the label as terms such as outdoor bred. But fast forward to today, and when we went round the supermarkets looking for that kind of labelling, we couldn't always find it. We went round branches of the 4 main supermarkets in Manchester looking for any pre-packed own-label meats described as outdoor bred or outdoor reared. And while some did have the information to clarify what that meant, others didn't. For example, in the Sainsbury's we went to, it was there on the label on the outdoor bred bacon and sausages, but not on the outdoor reared loin steak. Similarly, at a nearby Tesco, the label on the outdoor bred bacon explained what the term meant, but there was no such information on the outdoor reared pork chops. At Asda, we could only find on that day 2 own-label outdoor bred or reared pork products, and neither of them included the additional farming information on the label. But at Morrison's, both the 2 outdoor bred pork items we found did have the detail of what that term meant. When we asked the stores why their products didn't always display the information they'd agreed to put there, Tesco and Sainsbury's both said that while their labelling meets all legal requirements and includes voluntary information they've signed up to, space restrictions for some products means that additional detail isn't always possible on the label. They stress that when they can't fit it on the label, detailed information on their farming and welfare standards is available online. Meanwhile, Asda said the vast majority of its pork does have detailed information on its labelling, but it agreed that there seemed to be some inaccuracies in the products we saw, which it's looking into. We also spoke to DEFRA, the government agency responsible for setting the labelling guidelines, who reiterated how important it is that the information on the label is accurate, telling us it was taking action to empower consumers through providing more detailed and consistent information, so shoppers can make even more informed decisions and have absolute confidence in the food they buy. And for some of the shoppers we met in Bury Market, it seems that can't come soon enough, because a few of them were still surprised to discover that the use of the word outdoor doesn't necessarily mean a pig has spent its whole life outdoors.
It is confusing for, I would say, most people.
Outdoor bred means the same. You imagine it to be outdoor and bred outside until they're actually killed. Very, very misleading on packages.
Here at Rip Off Britain, we're always ready to investigate more of your stories on any subject. Confused over your bills, or just trying to wade through never-ending small print? You can write to us at Rip Off Britain, BBC Key House, Media City UK, Salford, M50 2QH. Or send us an email to ripoffbritain@bbc.co.uk. The Rip Off team is ready and waiting to investigate your stories.
Well, as we've seen today, it's really important that we know the full background of the food we eat, where it's from, how it was made, and exactly what's in it. It's certainly reassuring to see how many people and organisations there are finding all that out on our behalf, but it really does pay to understand some of it ourselves, especially when the words on the label may not always mean quite what you think.
But these days, of course, some people are much more bothered about whether they're getting fresh local ingredients than perhaps they were in the past, which is why so many menus outline in great detail where absolutely everything has come from. And thankfully, the cases of them getting it wrong, as they could with those foraged mushrooms, are few and far between. So perhaps it's no wonder that when things do go wrong with our food, it can make national headlines. So we really do have to rely on those people who are responsible for checking that everything we buy is safe and as it should be. Well, I'm afraid that that's all that we have time for today, but we will be back to investigate more stories very soon. So please do keep sending them in to us on any topic at all, of course, not just food. We really do love receiving them. But in the meantime, from everyone on the team, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Well, if you've been ripped off, meet the guys helping you to get your money back. The sheriffs are coming at 11. And then offers too good to be true. Be careful who knocks on your door. Cowboys and Angels follows at 11:45. Next though, someone's trying to tell Martin something. He can't get through the front door. It's Homes on